Good evening, everyone. This is the Tuesday evening tutorial. So for those who are downloading the recording, I don't know if you're downloading all the recordings of the tutorials or only the specific one, but if you want to see how the semester test 1 was marked, I suggest you go and download the 15 September Tuesday morning tutorial, because that contains the memo for the semester test, the way we marked it, which means that no, we're still not going to release the memo. It's in the tutorial, and that's the only form of the memo you'll get. No other memo will be released to you, because we don't believe in releasing the memo, because then you just study that. Tutorial 09 morning, yes. All right, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be discussing the My Class usage, because you will need that for your prac on Friday. I spoke about it yesterday in class for those that stick around afterwards. We discussed it this morning as well, and we're going to discuss it now once again. Now, the My Class implementation it's a different approach to forcing the use of certain functionality within a class. So we'll start a new project. I'm not sharing my screen, sorry. We'll start a new project. Call this 15 Sep 2. Right, so we're going to start off with some basic UI, just so we can see what's going to happen. So firstly, I'm going to name this just do something. Add a rich text box, because you need a multi-line text box as well. So a rich text box. Just increase that slightly, and let's just maybe up the font a little bit. Font size. There we go. Font, and we'll make the font size, let's say 50. I think that would make it nice and large. That's fine. All right. No, I don't want form load. We never want form load anymore. Right. So let's start with adding a new class. So let's go add a class. We'll call this class parent, just to make it easy. We'll have our option statement, so option strict. Option explicit. An option infer. And we'll add one instance variable just for the sake of having our instance variables. We'll call it name and string. And we'll add a property method for it. Right. We'll do one function. So we'll do public override overridable function called display, and it returns a string. And the string that is being returned is simply I am the base class. So we add that as well. Right. So that's our base class. We called it parent. We've got one instance variable called name. We've got one property method that is just for our name. And we've got one overridable function called display that returns the result of I am the base class. Now let's go and add a child, a derived class. Once again, just add a variable. Let's add a surname here. And we'll add property method. No, you can't change it. Why is he complaining there? Oh, that's fine. All right. And then we'll add our surname. Right. Now let's handle the display. So what we want to do with the display is we just want to overwrite the display. And when we override it, we're going to change the output to this is the child class, or this is the child class display function. But we can see that the return is from the child class and the other one is the return from the display. What do I call it in base? Display function. Oh, I'm not inheriting, that's why. Inherits parent. Okay, there we go. So it's just overriding the display function from the base class, our parent, and then it's outputting this is the child class display function. And then we've got our base class, which is our base class, or let's call it our parent class. Parent class display function. Let's go back to our form. So we click on the button, we add our option statements at the top. Declare an array of type parent. An array of type parent, and then we'll resize it inside our button. Let's see how many families are we gonna have? How many are we gonna make? How many? Let's make it about 7 or 8. And what we're going to do is for each object, we're going to instantiate it manually. So we've got new. For the first one, I'm going to make it parent. Let's see, we have 8 of them. So let's go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm just doing this manually because it's easy to do it, or it's quicker to do it manually. Actually, no, I can just input a value. How many? Second one, I'm going to do child. Let's see, let's skip to child. All right. Then we can do a for loop. So for was 8, and we'll simply output our text to our rich box, a rich text box, append that, hold our array. So family array index dot display. All right. So that is all we need. Up until now, it's not anything you haven't seen as of yet. Let me just go and rename my text box quickly. Up until now, it's nothing you haven't seen. So we've got an array of the base class. We're populating that array with various types, but that's in the hierarchy, inheritance hierarchy of the base class. And we're calling a function. So we're doing polymorphism here, but we're calling a function that is overwritten in the case of the child class, or we're calling the base class version of the function where there is a parent class. So if I click on the run button, what you are most likely expecting to see is 8 outputs, where type parent will have output this is the parent class display function, and where of type child it will output this is the child class display function. So if you run that, is that the case? Ooh, and it's horribly formatted. Hold on, let's just quickly fix that formatting. Okay, let's just increase this. I think we're going to exceed the. Run that again. Output it, and there we have it. So I am the parent class display function. This is the child class display function. So we can see that we have our parent output, our child output, our parent, our child, parent, and child. So that is what is to be expected because we've got our parents and our child mixed in this array. And when we execute the display function, it executes the overwritten function where child object is present, and it uses the base where we've got the base class or the parent class implementation. Now, the question is, when we override a function, let's say for a specific reason, we don't want to use the overwritten function. We want to use the base class version of that function. How would we do that? Sorry, I just want to look at the question. So can you please make an example of the code under the button and ask the user input values of an array? We can do that. We can do that in a moment. Let's just quickly get through this example, then we'll do that. So in this case, you've got the surname. No. I'm at the display. In this case, what's happening when it's executing, it's calling the overwritten function display when we have a child object that's encountered, as is the case for 4 of them. But you want to now force them to use the parent class version of display. How would you do that? So in this case, without removing code, we'll add a new function, and we'll call this function, well, we can call it essentially anything, but let's call it my display. I think that's an appropriate name. So what my display is going to do, it's simply just going to return display. It's simply just going to call, simply just going to call the display function and give me the output. So nothing spectacular. So if we run this, what you'll see is, once again, it's going to execute the display function based on what the type is. So it's still going to execute our derived classes overwritten function when we call it. But now, if I add my class, what I'm doing here, we're currently inside the parent class. What I'm doing here is saying my class is, I'm saying that when you call the display function, you want to call my class's display function. So in this class, my class, I want to call the display function. So I want to call this specific display function. So when you invoke the my class option, what it does, it makes sure that when you execute it, irrespective of whether it's overwritten or not, it will execute the, I did not call my display, did I? Hold on. Did not change it. Okay, so let's just go and make sure. Once again, even just with the display. So it still executes them, class and child, so it executes the overwritten function. And if I add my class, but run it now, it will execute my class's display function, the one we're currently in, and you can see it executes the parents class display function. So my class just forces it to use that specific class's version of the display function, irrespective of whether it's overwritten or not. All right. So now there's something you'll need for Friday. So for those that were a bit unsure about question, I think it's question E, if I'm not mistaken, that is the use of the my class function. So with the rhinos and the lions, when it asks you to use the rarity function from the base class, you'll just have a function that uses its own rarity function, but then forces the my class implementation of that. So nothing too complicated. I know some of you are probably going to do the practical first, still be confused, and then when you come on Thursday after you've done the practical and we discuss it again, you'll then probably understand what I'm saying. So go and try it out. If it still confuses you, come back on Thursday for Thursday's TUT, because we'll discuss my display once again. So before I continue, are there any questions regarding the my display? Any questions regarding this, regarding what I have currently? Again, so like I said, it forces it to use the current class's function instead of the derived function. I'm assuming you haven't read the practical yet, because practical question E requires the use of my class, because you don't want to use the overwritten function, you want to use the base class implementation of the function. So have a look at the practical. Once you've done that, you'll understand how it's used. I'm just showing you what it can do. It just forces you to use this class's version of the display function. Even if it's overwritten, you still use this class's version of the display function. So when you're in an inheritance hierarchy and you want to use a specific class's display function or specific function in that specific class, then that's how you can force it. All right. So moving on, there was a question. So can you please make an example of the code under the button, but asking the user to input the values of an array? So let's go and change this up slightly. What we'll do is we'll display, let's output the name here. For the child, we'll output the name and space and the surname. Why are you giving me? Oh. Can you please the overridable on display function? Can you please reword that sentence for me? It doesn't make sense. Can you please the overridable on okay, we'll explain it again. Let's just do the input quickly here. So for Rodebe, do you want dynamic input? So array dynamically growing, or do you want a set value? Dynamic. All right. Let's do this dynamically. Let's have some fun. So I'm going to change the name to capture name and display list. Capture and display. It's going to capture name, add it to the list, and then display our entire list. Right. So let's get rid of all of this. Get rid of that for now. Just get rid of that now. So we're just going to add a few dots here because we need to make sure we go and fix that. In fact, let's just get rid of it entirely. So let's go with our persons. So we've got a list of people. Let's call it people then. We've got a list of people. We're using a base class implementation because we can either have a child or we can have a parent. So we can do this dynamically. So just stick with me here. Currently, we have private, have a counter because we need to keep track. There is a way of doing it without a counter, but you will probably use a counter. We'll just make this 0. So we're going to start it off on 0 when the program starts. So we can either use this is actually an example where you can use a form load because you want to make sure that this counter starts on 0. Otherwise, we can just call it 0 up here. Let's maybe do it on form load. We really want to make it dynamically allocated. We'll do it on form load. Let's just take that back there and make sure counter starts on 0. Now, counter represents the current size of the array. That's our point of counter here now. So every time I click the button, the purpose of the button is to capture the information of a user. So first thing I need to do is I need to make sure that I capture the information. So let's go and capture the information first, and then we'll add it to the array. So we first need to find out if we're inputting a child or whether we input a parent. I'm going to dim, let's call it dim choice as integer, which is going to represent the value actually let's combine a few things we've done before. So we have choice equals cint, and then we'll go input box, one for parent, two for child. That is a choice. We use select case, and we'll do that on choice. So we have case 1, and we will have a case 2. All right. So case 1 for parent, case 2 for child. So case 1, we have a parent. Yeah, case 1 we have a parent. So you go temp. I'm just using this as my input input. Then we will get the name. So we now know it's going to be a temp equals new parent. You can add that, but we're using the default constructor, so that's why it's not complaining about not having brackets. Then we need to set the name. Temp dot name equals input box what is your name, and then we'll take our counter. Now, there's a few things you can do. You can either change the counter up here because you know you're entering a value into parent. So you can change the counter up here. So counter equals, well, counter plus equals 1. And you can resize the array up here. The moment you know the new size of the array, you can resize the array. So we're increasing the array by 1, but we're adding it to the array as it's increasing. So we never have a wastage of space in here. So then we have our family, sorry, people at counter equals the temp array. And then for our child class, we've got child, we've got what is your name, but we also have a surname. Input box. What is your surname? Right, and then we add our temp to our array. And then once we're done, we're going to call a for loop. So for index as integer. equals 1 to counter, we're just simply going to output the names and surnames of people. So people dot display. And then we'll just add a new line characters to make it look nice. Index. Right. Let's just see. So can you explain in depth how to preserve keyword? Yes, I'll do that for you. All right. So right now, let's just see if it works quickly. So let's go. Let's run it. Currently, the size of my array is 0. I want to capture. I capture a parent, and we'll call it Karen. And Karen is being displayed. So let's say I want to go capture a child, and let's call Karen child. So let's what will its name be? I'm calling a child it. Damn, I really hate children now. Let's call it Mary. Mary has a surname as well, and we'll call that something. Right. Now, what's currently happening is because I didn't clear the text box over here, I set it pinned. Every time I click on the button, I should maybe just clear the text box because it's calling the array. It's calling the array every single time. So let's maybe, when we start, let's just clear the text box. So we start with a nice clean text box. Otherwise, you're going to have the duplication every single time. Right. So what's currently happening here? Let's discuss this read and preserve. When are you used to setting the size of the array? Let's ask that first. When are you used to resetting the size of the array? During execution time, yes, but let's take a story approach. Your story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. During the execution, at what point do you resize the array? When you have the size before you use the array, that is correct. Where do you normally get the size of the array from? From the user. That is correct. Now, in our case, we're not getting our size from the user. We're dynamically, and I really mean in this case dynamically, we're dynamically changing this as we go on. Now, you can still use preserve, even if you get the value from the start, but I want to give you the example of this. I give you a box. This box has 4 slots. And you fill all 4 slots of this box. And now you need to find a bigger box. What do you do? Do you use the same box or do you use a new box? A new box with more slots. What would you do? You get a new box. All right. So redim is just the action of redim, is that action of getting a new box. Now, what happens to the items in the old box? If you get a new box, what happens to the items in the old box? Do you want to keep them or do you want to get rid of them? You want to keep them. So that is what the keyword reserve is for. So rename is getting a new box. Preserve is making sure that whatever you had in the old box gets stored into the new box as well. So when you change this array size, it's telling us when we increase the size of this array, keep everything that's currently in the array. Now, VB is a bit funny sometimes. If you don't add the keyword preserve, let me show this to you quickly. If you don't add the keyword preserve, one, we'll just call name one. If we do it again, we'll call this name two. Tells me there's a null reference exception. Why is it doing that? So currently, is it still in execution mode? Let's open up people. And it says nothing. It's telling me there's nothing in the index that I'm currently in. So let's open up the people array itself. And I see name 2. I want to open up the full array. Let's just go to where I declared the array. So you see item 1 is now gone. And it's only item 2, the one we just entered. That one is there. It's because we didn't preserve. So let's go and add preserve. Let's just add I'm going to add a debugging point here. So we run it, say name 1. I'm just going to go over this because we're comfortable that if we go to people, let's just go to people. Okay, so people length 2. So there's 2 items. Item 0 we never use. So item 0 is empty in VB, and then item 1 is our current parent with name 1. All right. So if we continue from here, we add a second item. We're going to add a parent, and we'll call this name 2. And OK. And if we go here, let's just go to our array. You see we've got now 2 items. So because I used the keyword preserve, when I resize, when I add another slot, it made sure to keep what is currently inside this array there. So without the keyword, the chances of you losing what's in the array is very likely. Now, you don't always use it, and that's the weird thing about VB. I actually wonder if they change it, that you lose it every single time if you do that now. But the chances are you will lose the items in your array if you don't use preserve. Preserve just means when you're increasing the size, keep what is in the array there. Otherwise, if you're just redimming, you're getting a new box and you're leaving the old box. Not always, because keep in mind, up until now, the dynamic arrays that you've been creating, you didn't know the size of the array from the get-go. But when you worked with the array, by the time you worked with the array, you knew the size of what that array is going to be. And at that point, you resized it before you entered values into the array. The preserve keyword is when you are reading an array and there is potentially already things inside the array that you want to keep safe. Now, we haven't really given you a practical yet that has a situation like that. I'm not sure if we're going to give you a practical that has a situation like that, but the read and preserve is to allow you to keep what's in the array when resizing. So let's say you're at a let's say you're at a zoo and you have a animal array, and this animal array keeps track of all the animals for you. But now you entered in all the values of the array, so you know how many animals you currently have. You entered in all the values of the array, and one of the animals suddenly give birth. You have an additional animal. So now you don't want to re-enter everything. You'd rather make sure that when you enter in that next one, when you add that another animal, you read and preserve and then just add the last one instead of having to re-enter everything, instead of having to rerun the program from start and then entering every user or every animal's name. That's also one of the reasons why you'll see on my form, I don't have a setup button to set my size of the array. My capture button increases the size of the array. Most of the times, if you have a dynamic array of this nature, your array increases by the size of how you use it. Now, I wouldn't be too concerned here. Keep in mind, read and preserve is a VB specific thing. It's other languages deals arrays in other ways. So the chances of you using this again, I would say is fairly rare. The only time I've ever used this keyword is inside VB itself, and that is in my first year and now. I think this is the first time in 10 years that I've used this keyword because it's language specific. Java deals with arrays in a different way, so does all the other languages. So you need to make sure the language you use when you work with arrays, how it stores the array and whether it keeps them safe or not. But that's something you'll still going to deal with in your second and your third year, because it is a concept that is retaught with every language where you do a new instance of an array, especially in your third year, where the resizing of an array is going to be absolutely crucial. So I wouldn't stress about the preserve too much right now, but I'm sure you get the crux of what it means now. Are you comfortable with what it means now? Did I answer your question? Kind of went slightly off topic near the end, but okay, that's good. So yeah, it's just resizing the array, and whatever is in the array, it keeps it safe. So there, something new for you, seeing as I don't think you guys, well, Mr. Gottschall did this, I think last week, 2 weeks ago in one of his stats, but not something we expect the students to do right now. I don't think the practical will allow you to do it now in any case. Otherwise, let's actually see. Will this practical allow you to do it? Maybe you can just play around with it. Okay, so technically, you can actually, if you want to, you can use it in this practical, because there's nothing here that says, it says using a single array instantiate objects to store information of the different lions and rhinos, the number of okay. You have the number of wildlife. So you should be using a well, nothing says it has to be user input. It says your wildlife will be input by the user. So you can, if you want to, make this number of wildlife a dynamic situation like we just did. Otherwise, you could just do it the normal way. You can input the number of wildlife, just instantiate the array there. It's up to you. But if you want to, you can potentially use this in your current practical if you want to play around with it. Just keep in mind that you need to make sure that because it's going to change how your code executes just a little bit. Most of it will be the same. You'll probably just add like 3 more lines of code and make sure that your outputs are properly formatted as well. Otherwise, you're going to create a lot of duplications like I did over here. Depending on where you output your value, you can output it inside the select case as well, and then you don't have to clear the array. So every time you have a new input, you can output that input, or you can have a special button that does the output for you. Those are the options you have. Any other questions? Do we only use my class in the base class only? Because as I was using it in the derived class, it said name can be simplified and became a bit darkish. How do you mean? So if you say, let's just take my display, we'll call it something else here. Let's call it this display. You're referring to this. Naming rule violation. Oh, just give it a second. Naming rule violation. The names must begin with uppercase characters. Okay, here we go. So you're referring to this. Name can be simplified. All right, let me show you why. If I go here, do you see this is not giving me that option? Now, let me point this out. When you override a function, what does that generally mean? If I override this function is overridable, what does that mean? Different calculations, that is correct. Now, if you're in the base class, or if you are in a parent class and you have a class below, then that probably means there is a different calculation than the child class. So my class makes sure that this specific version of the display is being executed. But if you're in the child class, if this object is encountered, what version of this display is going to be executed and why? I want you to specifically say why as well, because that's the important part. When I run this class, this inherits from parent. When I run this class, this version of this is going to execute. Just think about it. Think about it logically. Look at the hierarchy. You've got parent and you've got child. Child inherits from parent. What does that mean? Is there else below parent? Yes. Is there a class below child? You say there can be, but remember, if there is one, you'll code it. Currently, the way the code is set up, there isn't one below child. So there is nothing that will override this function. And that's why name can be simplified. It's not an issue. Name can be simplified because having my class or just having display executes this display regardless, because there is nothing under child. Let's go and add another class. Let's go make this, we'll make this baby. Just copy and paste these. Just doing this for recording's sake, because we had some complaints that say, why do we need it in every single class? Well, if I put it there, you can damn well put it there as well. Not meant to you guys, don't take that personally. All right, so let's add something. Let's just, we're not going to do the property methods, but let's just add a second age as integer, just the months. I don't like doing these examples without an instance variable. All right, now let's go add a display function. So let's take display. We go display. Let's just add the extra output as well. So we add age. So now you see that there is another issue. And we will get to this issue. I want to see if you guys know what the issue is. Before I highlight what the issue is, what do you think is the issue here? Just add that function as well. Just to show you. What is the issue there? Inherits, yes. And that's not going to give me an issue again. All right. Right. So I'm inheriting from child. I'm increasing the hierarchy. So let's go back to child. If I add my class now, name can be simplified. Why is it doing it this time? So it still wants to remove my class. Display, I'm overriding the display. Display. Why do you think it's still giving me that? No. So let's go and look at this. Let's run. Let's see the difference. So right now it says it be simplified, and the suggestion it's giving is to remove the my class. As you can see, it just wants display. So it's currently saying those two lines are doing the same thing. So whether we have the my class or not, it does the same thing. I want to point one thing out here. Do you see it says overrides? It doesn't say overrideable. I want you to keep that in mind. So let's go to Elm. Where's our form? Where's our form? So currently we can now go and add just another one. We'll add child or baby. And let's just add a third case. In all three of these cases, I'm still calling display. So we have our output here. So we'll capture a child, a parent. We'll capture a child, and we'll capture a baby. Right. So we don't set the name of the baby, so it's 0 from the start. Go there. Okay. So right now I'm capturing child and baby. So let's go and slightly change this. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the type of this. I'm going to change it to child. Then all we need to do is we just remove this one case. So what's going to happen is I'll type child. So the array is now typed child, and we've got child and baby. So we execute it just to show. Where's the breaking? Missing a sign there. So I'm just going to execute it so you can see it still executes the same. So we've got a child. Let's call it child 1, child 1, and we've got a baby, which we'll just call baby 3, baby 3. So we can see we still have the two versions there. It's outputting the display for child, it's outputting the display for baby. Now, let's go and call a different function. Let's go and call this display function. And let's see what happens when we call this function. So this display function is within this class, within the child class, or in this case, the base class. So we can call it. Sorry, this is display. It's over here that I want to change it. What do you think is going to happen? So let's call the child first. We'll call it child. We'll give it a name. We call the child child. Give it a surname. Child is child. Let's go and add a baby. So baby. Oh, I made a mistake. Sorry. So once again, we'll add a child. Just call it child. And we add a baby. That's 3. So baby, baby. What's going to happen when I enter the OK button here? What do you think is going to display? So I'm calling this display function. My child class calls, or my child class is going to call display function, and it's going to display name and surname. The baby class is supposed to display name, surname, and the age. I'm calling my class here, so we expect to see only name and surname, right? Are we expecting to see anything else? No. So we're expecting to see just baby, baby, and child, child. Now, let's remove the my class. And we run it again. So once again, we add a child. So we'll just call it child, child. We add a baby. So that's 3. We call it baby and baby. What do you expect to see now? Do you expect to see the age next to baby? Or do you expect to see just the name and the surname? Why not the age? Why don't you expect to see the age there? So what's happening there? Okay, so the reason why it's telling you it's a little bit of a VB issue specifically, but it's not going to give you. It says my class can be simplified. The reason why it's saying that specifically, just hold on, Siri is complaining here. The reason why it's saying that is because display is not an overridable function. It's not looking at the hierarchy. It's an overrides function. Baby overrides the name, overrides display. The parent is overridable. It is the base version of this display. So it recognizes that down the hierarchy, there can be different versions of this display. When you're overriding a function, it sees it as this is the final. It doesn't see that there's more down the line. So in this case, it's saying name can be simplified because it's not looking down the hierarchy to see if there's any more because it's overrides. But as I just showed you, my class still ensures that you execute this version of the function, and that if you have something that overrides it, it won't use that overrided function. It will use the class you're currently in. This is supposed to not be there anymore because the baby overrides the display function. But because the display function in this case doesn't originally come from this class, it thinks that this my class is not needed because it's overrides. It doesn't look down the hierarchy because the function is overrides and not overridable. If this was overridable, then it would not give you this issue. So without the my class option in the base class, the program will always display the child class. Display function, since the display function in the base class is overridable. Yes. So the moment, if you don't add my class, it will always execute the lowest version of the last overwritten version of the function. So for instance, I've got parent and baby. If I pass an object of baby, it will execute this version of display. If I pass an object of child, it will execute this version of display. And if I pass a parent, it will execute this version of the display. My class forces it to use a specific class version of the display. So if I have an array of parents in this case that can accept all three of these types, but I only want to see the name output, then I can call my class here, like I did over here, and will only output the name. Or for the sake of a child, if I don't want to see the age, I only want to see the name and the surname and not the age, then I can execute this version of the display by calling my class. And then if it's a baby, well, my class here is redundant because there isn't anything below it in the hierarchy. So my class over here doesn't have to worry because there's nothing below it. And that this is giving me, it shouldn't be, this is technically not correct. So this is an issue that it's still showing this because this is not an error anymore because there is something down the hierarchy that can change it. But if this was the lowest form of the inheritance, then my class would be redundant because the display is the last version of the overrides. There's nothing below it. So we have another comment. I see. So we use my class inside a class that has an overridable method. As I've just shown you, it's not just when it's overridden. So in the hierarchy, even though display is not override over here, but it still gets overwritten in a lower hierarchy. But essentially, it's a function that's overridable. As you go down the hierarchy, it will execute the lowest version of that object encounter. So object parent will execute this display display. Object child will execute this display, and object baby will execute this display, which is its lowest form. But object baby is also of object child. So if I want to force it to use the child's version of display, I would call my child or my class inside the child class. And if I want to execute the parent's version of display, I will execute my class inside the parent class to just see the name. So my class executes the current class's version of a function you are in. So if you change the execution of a function in lower versions or in derived classes, and let's say you want to force it to use a specific version of the function, you need to go to that specific version and then just have another function that calls it with my class. Like I said, it's something that you'll get used to. It's not something you'll use quite often. I don't think I've ever actually used this implementation. I've never encountered a program that needs the specific implementation. So when we set up a practical, we make sure that it is required for that specific practical itself. But in terms of if you're overriding a function, you tend to always use the overrided function in the class type you're encountering. But you need to be aware of the fact that you can force certain executions. All right. So if there are any further questions, please do ask. Otherwise, I'll still be around for about 5 minutes. It is the end of the section. So can I ask you to explain the overridable and overrides? Okay, so overridable means you've got a function that has an execution, but when inherited, you can't change the execution. So overridable is generally in the base version of this function. So the highest version where this function is relevant. So in this case, a parent has a display function, but your child will have additional things to be added to that, so it's overridable. So for the overrides means, yes, I'm inheriting this function from my parent or from the base class or the parent class, but I want to change the execution. I want more. So override it to change how it executes. I want different execution. So overridable allows a child class to override it, and an overrides means I'm taking the fact that I can change it and I am changing it. So if I remove the overridable there, you see it gives me no issues. But if I go to my child class now, it tells me there's an issue because it says public overrides function display cannot override display as string because it is not declared overridable, which means that this function will not work because the base class, the parent class, doesn't allow me to override it. If that still confuses you, I would recommend that you go back. Maybe did overrides and overridable tutorials. I can't remember which specific tutorial that was, because we did discuss it extensively in terms of how to override, why do we override, and why is it overridable. But essentially, it's just allowing the inherited classes to, the child classes of in the hierarchy to change the functionality of a specific function. If it's not overridable, then you can't override it. You can't change the functionality. So I can't have the surname outputted as well. I would have to change this function name to something else, and then I can't have polymorphism. Because if I can't override the parent class, then I can't have a polymorphism fall in this. So this becomes redundant, and it means I need to now keep track of the individual classes again. So I need to keep track of parent, need to keep track of child, need to keep track of baby. this wouldn't be possible anymore. All right. Any other questions? To a certain extent, yes. Because remember, it forces you to use a specific version of function. So it's not like polymorphism where it goes to the most relevant form and execute that version of the function. It now takes a specific function. You're telling it, I want to use this function. So it's not best match anymore. It's now you will use me. To a certain extent, it does kind of turn off polymorphism for that specific call itself. All right. Any other questions? If there's no other questions, we are reaching the end. I think we have about 5 more minutes or so left. So if there are any more questions, you can post it. I will still stick around for about 5 minutes. Otherwise, I am going to stop the recording here. So for those that are watching this recording up until this point, if you want to look at the semester test memo or how we marked your questions, that was done this morning in lecture TUT, I think TUT 09. So just go and have a look at that. If you want to see maybe where you made a mistake, once you get your papers back, we will discuss with you in class how we're going to return your papers to you. I'm going to try and just load it to Eve for you. Otherwise, we'll probably just email it to you directly. But we'll get to that point. The marks will be out in a moment. I got sidetracked this afternoon. If I ever talk about marks, when I ever promise you to do something, just multiply it by 2, and that's when you'll get it. So I told you yesterday you'll have it by that afternoon, so which means you'll have it by tonight. It's a bad habit I have. I get sidetracked very easily, but I'll make sure it's out tonight. Don't worry. I promise you it will be out tonight. I won't sleep until it's released. All right. Okay, guys. If that is all for today, I'll see you tomorrow afternoon for our lecture, where we will be discussing files. Something interesting, something new. So please make sure you do attend, because I do expect a lot of questions on that in the foreseeable future, the next coming 2 or 3 weeks. Right, gents and ladies, I will see you tomorrow.